Shant, director of war, watched as the last of the enemy ships burned in. The vacuum of space, he whistled a dirge to himself as he watched an entire species fall, a people too dangerous to be allowed to live amongst the fearful creatures. He guarded his aides and crew stood silently as they awaited their orders. He nodded to his arms men. We obey, burn their world, and may the goddess keep them safe in their next molting. In silence, his ships let loose the worst his people had to offer. Offenses against the goddess and a horror to all. The crew watched in silence as the missiles approached the blue and white marble hanging in space. His crest widened when the counterfire from the planet managed to destroy so many of his assets, but it was stilled by the knowledge that no planet can defend against an army that holds space within moments. His fire began to strike cruel nightmares that ignited the atmosphere and shattered the world itself. In less than an hour, the fiery inferno and dust storms had wiped the planet clean of 5 billion years of history and rendered it to bedrock. Out of the flame, a hiss against the rage of a burning world, came a transmission. He was ready to ignore it as just another pointless plea for mercy until it called his name. Director of war, murderer, we are dead and we will not see our revenge. We have sins that you never saw, evils we hid from you and buried in our darkest history. Today we will let them loose upon you and the cowards that sent you like a knife in the dark. You have killed us, so at least we will not be here to answer for our sins. You were afraid, we will show you fear. Something loomed into the transmission, a gray creature, a thing of metal. Its eyes were just dark holes, and its face was hidden or warped by the armor it wore. We will see you soon, director, he swore to himself. Of course, these lunatics had a weapon. They lived by inflicting death. Every day he froze his voice and issued orders that his people had never given before. It is not sufficient. I want the planet broken. We will continue to fire. Nothing of these people can be allowed to stand. We remain on full alert until I am certain that nothing remains. His 1,000-strong fleet, every ally and co-conspirator, paused briefly before resuming fire on the burning planet. It seemed perverse to many of them, beating a ruined corpse, but they continued the reign of destruction until the planet itself surrendered as his missiles breached the core itself and returned the planet to a molten ball glaring at him with hate. He had watched silently as his people added crime to crime, piling evil on evil. One more last and final sin to be done. I want that moon sent into the remains of the planet. Who knows what they have hidden there? As his first weapon struck, they were met with silence. Then the moon seemed to glow an ominous orange that quickly became a dark red. Then the moon shattered into millions of parts, a glittering rain of particles swiftly turning dark in the cold of space. He looked at his arms. Man, was that us? The arms man looked at the numbers. Director, I have no idea. I've never used these weapons before. Probably. The director watched as the hours passed as the debris from the moon fell inwards towards the expanding ball of molten rock that had been a planet filled with life. He had seen enough. He turned to his crew. Stand down and take us home. We have done our duty and we will probably be cursed for it, but I never want to see this system again. Get us out of here. The director stayed in his cabin and continued writing his reports. So far 11 of his ships had self-destructed for a mix of reasons, mostly guilt and some fearing the response of the dead. He knew his own people were not the type, but his allies were. Well, gutless. They had destroyed the humans out of fear, and now they had discovered that fear is a deep well with no bottom. Now they were afraid of ghosts, as the humans' last transmission had filtered quietly out to the fleet, a simple transmission, and they were terrified. Fools, dead is dead, and no one has ever been as dead as the humans within the Orc cloud surrounding the burning world. The shattered remains of the moon waited for the enemy to leave. It made no attempt to rescue the broken remains of the mining ships that had tried to defend the fallen world. It had other priorities. Slowly they began building a connection with home, a summons and a report that would bring retribution for a crime it had sent. The warning, and now it would let humanity fall upon its unexpected enemy. Space is dark and always ready to kill you, and soon they would be the face of that darkness far across space. Deep in the unexplored edges of a spiral arm, a light dimmed and briefly died, then revived with an ominous red color. The AI responsible for monitoring the systems immediately began reporting the loss of a distant colony, and old weapons stirred in their uneasy sleep. Guardian AI alert signal, quantum locked beacon on. Colony 30,900 has reported an extinction level event. Reports of hostile xeno action and all inhabitants lost. Planet and moon base destroyed. Nanite constructors are currently en route to the local Orc cloud to prepare a response. Monitoring is ongoing. I recommend a support fleet be deployed. The creature studying the report was vaguely human-shaped but wreathed in restless metal, a skin that never stopped moving, breaking into obscure patterns as he absorbed the details. His humanity was still sufficient to allow him to mourn the loss of so many children, so many brave souls that had risked everything to continue the great adventure of the human race. He summoned his peers. This is Commander Silver Wisp, I regret to report that one of our children's planets has been destroyed. It was clearly an attempt at genocide. They must be considered lost. The faces around him were equally strange. Human now only in name, and the ability to interbreed the only rule that held the disparate mutations and alterations together as a people. One allowed tears to roll down her own face. Startling white eyes peering out from beneath a dusting of green lashes. Who would do such a thing? Did we engage in some hostile act? Silver Wisp shook his head, the pattern swirling quickly across his face. They were a first day's colony seeking out our beginnings on a new world. They took little technology with them and only the bare minimum of medical adaptation. Even our beacon was exiled to their moon. No threat to any spacefaring race. He softened his voice. The people of the forests were very sentimental and easily upset, especially if you threatened their arboreal planet's. Ambassador Rowan, we will seek out justice. I called you to ask permission to send a response. One of the other members stirred at that. This one whose humanity had been adjusted for the ice moons, one of the few types that had almost entirely given up on breathing save for occasional speech. Commander Wisp waited patiently while the man constructed a painful sentence. Response permitted. Memorial will be built. Ice will sing for the lost. Then he fell silent, apparently exhausted by the effort. Ambassador Rowan's green eyebrows rose and fell at that. She had never heard one of the ice dwellers make such a long speech before. Although their strange culture was famed for its ice music, it was entirely instrumental in form. Another voice spoke, one closer in form to the commander, save that its body was plated in what looked like fine mail rather than liquid metal. It was obviously in a gravity-free environment. Permission granted. We must mourn the dead and seek justice. I take it you didn't call me without an actual plan. Commander Wisp nodded. Of course, I intend to take my fleet and see what happened. If I may flatter myself, I'm certain that I can obtain justice for our loss and the murder of a world that created a moment's surprise from the others. The old fleets tended to avoid the far points of human space, reluctant to engage with unprepared zeniths. They were fearsome. Humanity preferred to let the scientists, rovers, explorers, and traders find their way out there. They said they weren't diplomats, they were the reason for diplomats. Commander Wisp smiled briefly as he looked around. So we are. Agreed, I will find justice. Each of the council nodded and signed their people's support. A quorum of war was established and the mission approved. Ambassador Rowan added a final comment, recover their names if you can. I will grow them a forest, a silent place for their spirits to rest if they come home. Fair sailing. Commander. Quorum of War Part 2. Silver Wisp sat and let his body rejoin the ship, his skin flowing into his seat and console. Applications immediately started flooding in from researchers, the curious, the angry, and the bloodthirsty that wanted to accompany the mission. An old fleet going to a legitimate war on the far edge of human space. This would be a research entertainment opportunity of a lifetime. He checked the social credit of each applicant, cross-checked their references, and issued a 100 passes. Out of sheer perversity, he carefully ensured that none of their personalities would mesh, so they enjoyed combat no problem. He sent a note to the quorum of war that he had assembled the required witnesses and would depart once they arrived. He had a sneaking suspicion that it wasn't going to be that easy. Ambassador Rowan felt uncomfortable as she approached the Silver Wisp. Common courtesy dictated that the commander was both the man and the ship, and you were expected to acknowledge that it was truly vast, a gently sloping dome that only seemed to expand. She was aware that he had been constructing it for nearly 10 millennia, a labor of love equivalent to her forest domain. A nagging fear of what she had unleashed on the brute zenith had dragged her from slumber in the soft greens of her home and into this dark metal strangeness. She made a call to the ship and in clipped tones announced, this is Ambassador Rowan, signatory to the quorum of war, requesting permission to board. As is my right. Silver Wisp grinned as he answered, welcome, Ambassador. Your rooms are prepared. I'll drop by when you are settled. In her needlecraft was taken under autopilot and interrogated, then pulled deep into the vast craft, liquid metal walls sliding around her ship. Finally it was gently deposited in a vast hall, even as the walls were sealed without a sign or mark to indicate a way out. Beautiful and practical, she thought. Her ship unsealed and revealed a forest. She drew in a breath, the sounds and smells of her home world filling her lungs and dappled daylight feeding her now happy leaves. She stared about at the tall trees, ancient and real. This was no illusion, this was the work of ages. Why had he grown this? She had no record of her people traveling with him before. She dismissed the why and just resolved to thank him. Her terror of space receded among such friendly surroundings. In the ore cloud around a burning world grew the true dark, the side forever hidden. The beacon was not just a call for help, it was a creature sent to watch, record, and guard. Rarely would it need to take form, even rarer that it would be permitted revenge, but this time, this terrible time, there would be no leash and no rules save only One, it was permitted to exact justice from the people that had committed the atrocity, not the governments, not the civilians, just anyone that stood on a ship or pulled a trigger. Then it had been given the blessing of the quorum of war from the ragged and broken rocks. It drew what it needed to become the walking nightmare that mankind always knew rested within its figure, flickered as it tested its camouflage guns, blighted nearby rocks as it refined its techniques, plasma picked out specks of dirt from dark space as it rehearsed its algorithms. Blades were crafted and blackened, tested against the stone itself. The flickering image it had sent as a warning now become real, a face as cold as space and a heart as stony as the asteroids it was forged from, as pitiless as the creatures that had earned its existence. Beacon raised his face to the universe, fully real for the first time, filled with the pain of watching those he guarded die as he was held helpless by their rules. The nanites that had carefully built him had finished their job and had left a trail for him, lines bright in the dark for him to follow. With a final message to the silver wisp, he resigned from the human race and went to work. He wrapped the dark around him and left his failed post for the last time, carrying only weapons and vengeance onwards. The Shant Council was as miserable as he expected. There would be no heroic welcome for his bloody work, just the sickening feeling that his nation had soiled itself in the name of some nebulous fear. A planet-bound species melted into flaming rock. A few miners burned from the sky. This was not a story they wished to hear nor recount. Still recounted he must. Council, on your orders I have destroyed the uncontacted race that called themselves human, since they were in no position to do much more than throw a few rocks at us. We suffered no casualties. He allowed the silence to draw out. One of the council shifted uncomfortably and began, we gave you those orders because the race was perverse. It could not be allowed into space. A murmur of agreement came from his colleagues. Indeed, it was at the insistence of our allies. It would have been political suicide to refuse. The director of war nodded. Indeed, how could we bear the shame of not committing genocide and annihilating a race that was so very different from those that we understand? Those spears looked very sharp and those miners were quite difficult to kill. Thankfully you gave me 1,000 ships to do it. He slowly peeled his rank from his shell and dropped it on the floor. I believe the galaxy must be free of all threats now, since you sent me against such terrifying opposition. I hereby resign. Perhaps the goddess will forgive us. She tends to do that. I don't. He turned and his rank was crushed into the floor as a curt glance sent the armsmen to open the door. The council watched him leave. More than one of them feeling the same, sensing the mood, the chairman snapped, we all agreed. Read, we all read the same damn reports. A race that hunts as nomads, a race that eats prey, hunts as a pack, and yet maintains the technology that can build ships to harvest resources in its system. Never could we allow it to reach us. You saw the same projections. It would be here in a generation and we would not be able to stand against it. It was but the egg of a nightmare, a thing best destroyed and forgotten. He stood up. In any case it is a thing done, them and those we called on to do it, but it is over. The council is dismissed. One of the council, not willing to be dismissed so easily, held up a copy of the warning sent from the beacon that they had officially ignored. Is it the speaking stick was banged down with unnecessary force. As the council was dismissed, the question was left to linger in the air. The Alliance learned that while fear is a small thing, that ghosts are a children's tale best told in the dark, and that there are many monsters that can quickly become friends. Sometimes the true dark gets closer. The genocide had quickly become a silent shame, the threat of revenge a slow beat in the creatures that had ordered the deaths of so many. Questions were murmured sometimes to an empty room. What had they done to be so destroyed? Hidden was the unvoiced fear that perhaps it could happen to them. The clips of the fleet melting the world into molten rock, of the destruction of the moon over an offense never even declared or understood. They had been given no reason but their very existence and died for it. Others delighted in the victory, the death of a cancer, the destruction of a threat foreseen and dealt with quickly. How many would have died if the humans had reached space from out of the dark? Beacon followed the fading path laid by the nanites. A shipyard loomed ahead of him, the obvious destination for whatever ship he had followed. He had no information, yet he slowed his approach, wasting a day to stay out of sight of any sensors, and then drifted gently into what seemed to be the normal approach to the stations. He left his sensors on passive, hunting the right ships and then making his plans in the shipyards. The mood was grim as they returned to sullen silence and strange rumors. The announcement that the director of war had resigned sent another message to the old hands on his ships. More than one put down his tools and walked off the ships, throwing their military identification into deep space. They had heard the threat and they knew what they had done. The night seemed darker, the world smaller than before. Beacon landed softly on a ship. He was waiting for confirmation before he acted, but he recognized it. This one had fired 8 million kilotons of ordnance at his planet. He drew his primary blade and prepared to meet the destroyers of all he had been sent to guard blood for. Blood he wanted names because they had never asked, he wanted to remember because that tempered his rage. They had killed the nameless, but he wouldn't know he would kill the known and wear their skin as a trophy, a simple torn panel. And he dropped silently inside. Beacon found himself in a dark vent, hearing only the hiss of chilled gas sweeping through the pipes. He inhaled a deep breath and analyzed it. Oxygen was running at nearly 30%. He chewed through the numbers, running estimates on what that could mean. That could indicate large-scale creatures or some seriously inefficient design. Gravity was around 7. So it could be both. He would investigate when he had a sample time to begin. He punched a hole through the vent and dropped the 3 MERS to the floor. A quick scan found several doors, nearly one with what passed for security around here. He didn't bother with the camo, merely moving to his hunting pace. The door was some composite metal, useless against him but sufficient to block any audio. Surprised, then he forced a probe into the security system and quickly overrode the lock, pushing silently to open it. Now he could hear the mumbled groaning of his enemies, so he pulled his blade closer and pushed open the door. Silver Wisp announced to his passengers that boarding was complete. He had created 10 different committees, each with slightly overlapping responsibilities, and had asked them to elect a speaker that should keep them busy. With a thought, he sent himself hurtling towards the edge of human space weapons foundry, now complete and busily at work. Probably time to visit the ambassador. Ambassador Rowan was still entranced with her quarters when a low bell told her that she had a guest. The present rushed back in the prospect of a bloody war of vengeance with her name on it. When the door vanished into the wall, she saw the commander waiting for her permission to enter. She nodded and watched as his body reflected the dappled light, taking on a tinge of green and the patterns flickering across his skin becoming almost organic. She bowed and said, "Welcome, Commander. You have made me welcome in ways I cannot explain." "Thank you." Silver Wisp nodded and smiled. "Thank you. I had hoped you would treasure this place as much as I do." He allowed his glance to wander, enjoying the tall and verdant trees and the calls from irritated wildlife, and took a deep breath. "When I was a child I loved the forest, even if space called louder. I'm old enough to remember the forest burning, and I took it upon myself to stand guard over the green places." His eyes returned to dark steel. "I have news, Ambassador. Would you hear it?" Without her even noticing, her roots began extending deep into the soil below her, preparing for a storm. She nodded. The commander nodded. "The beacon has become itself. It has agreed to my terms and has begun seeking justice for our people, its children. If you are willing to listen, I can tell you what I have agreed, but Beacon will not change his course. He has resigned from humanity." Rowan shivered. "Since when do we allow weapons to resign? Do axes get to choose if they wish to chop? What have you agreed?" Silver kept any sign of humor from his patterns. "Those who live their lives in contented peace tend to look for the sharpest stick when things become difficult." He was a soldier and measured his response with a more professional eye. "Rowan, he is no weapon. He is a broken-hearted parent cast in steel and vengeance. He will seek out every Xeno that stood on a ship and destroyed his home while he was helpless to intervene. I estimate the most damage he can do is 200,000 casualties, possibly a little more, but he is content to let me speak for our dead. When it comes to the rest." She bent as if an ill wind had hit her, her leaves furling as if in a frost. "So many. What are we setting upon these people? Always this too hard, too soft, too much, or never enough?" "Ambassador, that represents less than 10% of the number of families he just lost. I would kill them myself for the slaughter of one of our worlds, but he will teach them terror. He will remind them that they drove our people to hide and die and then burn their very world. Mercy is for those you wish to forgive. I will not grant it, and Beacon is merely their first lesson." The stain of steel covered his skin once again. "The softness of the forest forgotten. I guard the green places and our children that play within, and I will see them pay for their cowardice." Beacon listened carefully. The vents telling him who was hiding and trying to stifle their crying. He had sealed the ship, declaring a full quarantine and isolating the crew from the salvation they thought awaited them on the outside of the ship. The idiot AI had not even noticed that it was the infection that was the one calling for quarantine. He reduced the lights a little more and caught a reflection from one of the panels. It was a dark thing spattered with various fluids. He was what they had made him, a blood-stained shadow of his people, a ghost of their ideals. He burned off the blood before something could use it to trace him, and paced slowly towards the cubicle where he could sense 2 creatures trying not to sob. His blade was sharp. He had time before they finally broke into the ship. Today he would teach them fear, even as he had cried out as he watched his children huddled in the dark crying as their world burned around them until the very air was flame. Rowan stood in silence as she tried to absorb the situation. Despite the commander's words, she had the same thoughts, just not articulated as easily as a soldier. It made sense to her that Silver Wisp remembered the burning of the forests and attack on her kind of human by an unthinking machine race, long in the past and long extinguished, but the first time That the race of man had truly stood in arms together and had decided to face the universe as one, a bond now stronger than any steel and is taken for granted. Even she had forgotten that other men held the skies safe for her and her people, careless as they built playgrounds and beauty that enriched them all. She pulled up her too deep roots and allowed the vengeance of the forest fill her blood. Will feed the soil that something wholesome can grow. She would not condemn something so broken as the beacon, not when they had rendered its people to wretched and broken rock. To the bitter end, to justice if possible, but revenge if that was all that was left. The universe had all but forgotten the smell of smoke, but she remembered all the carefully buried memories of her tears watering the burned nursery. She attended, her choices rang through her. She shook slightly, a tremble that ran across her leaves. She swore silently this was the price of immortality, that eventually you could become anybody, even a bloody Triffid. The Shank Council was unhappy to be recalled, and had yet to appoint a replacement for the recently deceased director. It was tragic that his hearts had failed so suddenly after his retirement, but they had given him a state funeral. Several states had, in fact. Amazing how many people had taken an interest in his sudden end. The council was aware that many people were still asking questions. The councilman currently stuck holding the speaking stick had been dragged from his home and was not feeling particularly charitable. So why exactly are we here in the middle of the damn night? He slammed down the stick with enough force to awaken several of his colleagues that had fallen back into a doze. A fleet commander stood to attention in front of the council, unmoved by the noise. The Xeno was a cold-blooded one, stiff in its uniform. Life Support Council, I must report that we have lost a vessel. The councilman waved the stick. What? Why am I dragged from my home? Because we lost a ship. We have millions of the damn things. Am I never to sleep again? The Xeno seemed to think about that. Sir, that may well be true. I know it's going to be difficult for me. For a while the ship we lost was in port, the Haven of Fire, a Corsair-class ship with a crew of 80 mixed species. It was in for a refit after the human problem was resolved. It had expended all its supplies and had served well, so frankly no one noticed it went offline. We are still trying to piece together how it happened, but I must show you what has happened. He knew there was no point in explaining, so he simply triggered the screens. It was obviously the point of view of one creature the council watched as it broke into the ship, as it began to hunt down the crew. As it broke into a secured room, they saw the knife, a thing of darkness, and then it found a crewman. Most of the council was still vomiting when he paused the recording. Council, this was sent to me by name to show you what it was doing. It held that ship for 9 hours and recorded every kill, every butchery. Each crewman was stripped of their face. Its skin was taken for some unknown purpose. It also left a message written in blood and excellent calligraphy. Was a promise, you will all fall to me. It was signed Beacon. He resumed the recording. If he had been forced to watch it, so could they. He added, this has been broadcast to the entire fleet and we couldn't stop it in time. I believe this is going to end poorly unless we mobilize quickly. The Haven of Fire was now surrounded by heavily armed Marines. Following the first investigation, a bunch of pale and sickened medical and police staff had left the ship under escort, completely silent. After that, it was armed men in full biohazard suits that sealed the door and were apparently waiting for orders. Beacon watched silently, fully hidden and hovering 300 m above the ship. He could wait. He already knew what the next target was, and he was willing to be patient. He spent the time going through all the data that he had ripped from the ship and its crew, building a map of events and a death list. Finally a new group arrived, stern-faced and cold-blooded. They arrived at the ship's port. We come from the council. No one is to pass this door without my personal permission, and nobody, and I mean nobody, leaves unless I am standing here. If they try, you shoot. And you shoot to kill. The creature radiated the coldness only achieved by a lifetime in government service or waitressing, and the bio-suited guards quickly nodded their agreement. His face was mostly concealed by the mask as he opened the door, entering. Now he was running a live feed to his office, feeding the darker parts of the council with information in the hope that it might prove useful. They were more familiar with the sorts of damage done to the crew and perhaps might have some insight. 3 bodies on the right-hand side of the door. 2 are missing lower limbs. The blood trail indicates they crawled to the door before they were executed. Tracking, the Shant Council read the report in silence. They had seen it happen, but this was something else. Their experts had mapped the destruction, the injuries. It was clear this intruder had overcome and subverted security within the first few minutes. It could obviously have killed the crew as quickly, but had chosen to do this 9 hours of hellish murder. The current holder of the speaking stick offered it to the group but found no takers. He sighed and tried to give voice to what he had read. We have awakened a demon from old. This is beyond anything those humans could have created. This is beyond us. One of the other council members shook his head. This is a new thing, an attack on one ship. This is not a war. This is personal. We have ships and crew across 1,000 worlds. I vote to secure the area and hunt this thing down. We can evaporate the damn star if Necessary. The rest of the council nodded in agreement. The speaker spoke. Fine, I will appoint the fleet commander as director and instruct him to hunt this thing down. He shall have whatever resources are required. Silence fell in the room. No one believed it was over. Silver Wisp summoned the 100 witnesses to watch as he arrived at the graveyard of a human world. The walls turned to steel, then pulled open to reveal the burning remains of a once vibrant planet. Flaring rock and shattered hope. He addressed his audience. A playground we called Eru, a home to our people. For over 5,000 years we crafted it from dead soil and made it beautiful as a gift, as a promise. All man is man. They wanted to explore our beginnings, live with the rain and the dirt, hunt and gather, live the life that we were first designed for. Many of us have grown up in such worlds, finding out what it is to be human. He closed the walls. Witness this. We stand in arms against such cruelty. They have burned our children beyond recovery, and we can only mourn and seek justice. I will be scanning the system to its very edges in the hope that someone survived, and in the knowledge that none could have, because we must always have hope. Then I will bring the wrath of man upon the misbegotten bastards that did this, until they are sorry that they ever learned how to make fire. The cold steel of his eyes met the fury in his voice as he vowed justice on those that had chosen to burn the green spaces that man had built. One of the men stood forward, so seen and witnessed. He bowed a little and added, I will lead the service for those lost. Silver Wisp. Until then the crowd dispersed and left him alone with his pain and his plans. Beacon listened as the enemy made all sorts of cunning plans and smiled. He had left them his next target hidden under the thin soil of a half-deleted file. It had taken them a full day to find it, and he watched as they summoned their marines to guard the ship. The Mesp was battleship class, swarming with a massive crew 4 times the size of the Haven of Fire. It had immediately launched from the station and moved into a close orbit of the local sun, on full alert and full scanners until the emergency drill was over. The crew had one way or another found out what had happened to its sister ship, and a not insignificant number of crewmen had failed to show. Military police were pretending to look for them, and instead they drank together in silence, and they ignored what they had all seen. The recording had filtered down to everyone, even the barkeep, and a sort of strange waiting silence filled the shipyard. They watched as the bodies were removed from the Haven of Fire, sometimes in quite small bags piled together. It took Beacon only a moment to track down the marine transport that was being sent to defend the Mesa Clip. It wasn't even worthy of a name, simply a serial number. It would soon be burned in the memory of anyone that heard of it for the next 1,000 years. After his intervention, he slipped quietly aboard the Citadel-class Marine 3008 and waited. The ship had a central command post behind the best of armor, room for 200 to 400 soldiers, and excellent defensive fire. Beacon pulled himself deeper into the vent and waited for it to leave, polishing his blades and cleaning his weapons. As he waited for the ship to be far beyond help, out of the dark and silence of the bar came a drunken, angry voice. We should have left those humans alone. What the had they ever done to us? Poor bastards didn't have a chance, and I dropped 1,000 kilotons of Atmos burners on them. The goddess isn't going to forget or forgive me for this one. The voice was met with silence. The military police just drank deeper and switched off their comms. A single gunshot rang through the bar. Silver Wisp stood alone. As the witnesses returned to their endless bickering, his attention dwelt in the weapons foundry, creating every nightmare and pondering its use. Much he sent back to the furnaces, careful of the scars he would leave on the future. The punishment must meet the crime, and he had no mandate for genocide, nor the will to carry one out. It was like walking through the endless enemies that Earth had faced since the beginning of the expansion nearly 12,000 years ago, a mere blip in the existence of mankind. But a combination of immortality, FTL, and Goog had created a reservoir of ways to inflict pain and death that included several ways to end the universe itself. Silver Wisp reached into himself and pulled out the flint Aru head he had found as a child, a talisman and promise. He found it strangely entertaining that he would be able to identify with the creature that had made it if they stuck to drinking beer. Then they might even be able to chat about the properties of flint. He was a fan of CH and Greenstone, but the connection would be real, and then they would have used it to kill any bastard that had burned down a village. Beacon began by slipping silently to the Citadel itself. It wasn't difficult. The troops were lounging around the front of the ship, and the pilots hadn't bothered to close the doors. This ship didn't truly have a captain, just a marine commander and a pilot who pointed the ship. It was almost enough to raise a smile as he hit the command to seal the Citadel itself and kick off the alarms. Then he waited. Invisible to the crew, the 2 pilots were suddenly surprised by the fall of anti-doors and energy shields. The lights went to emergency as the power plant was locked down, and their consoles went to a totally new menu, one they hadn't seen since they were boots. Then the comms lit up. Sir, I don't know, I didn't trigger it. More mad button pushing, sir. It needs you to be in here, or you need to be, well, you need to be dead. I don't know, sir. The pilot watched as the ship was slowed to 1/3 speed. Sir, I'm trying to troubleshoot it. This is a Citadel-class ship. The whole point is that you can't get in with. Respect command and here falls to me. Look after your men and I'll call you. He continued cursing and trying to regain control of the ship. Beacon unveiled himself with a grim smile. And you can't get out. My name is Beacon and you burned my world. We need to talk. He drew his knife and began. The Marines couldn't hear the screaming through the armored doors. Beacon pushed the remains of the pilots into a neat pile and then evaporated them with his plasma and then sat down, making himself comfortable at the command console. He watched the Marines outside run around like some headless fowl as they tried to force open the doors. Wasn't going to happen unless he let it. The whole point of the vessel was that it couldn't be taken while the Marines were busy boarding some other sorry bastard. He contemplated his route to the Mesa Clip, estimating he had around 4 hours before he was in full scanner range of the ship. Time to shut up the squeaking soldiers outside. He started by cutting off the grav plates throughout the ship and then immediately put the ship into a spin. He sat comfortably as the G-forces built, passing beyond anything organic life could withstand, and gave it an hour, turning the ship into a blender. Outside, the soldiers were being flung at increasing speed into each other, into every wall and every fitment. He watched with interest until the cameras were blinded by spray. Then he turned the ground gravity back on and steadied the ship. Softly whistling, he released the defenses. The thick door swung open silently, leaving a smear across the floor. It was covered in scorch marks and dimples from weapons fire. He gazed at the new decorations that the corridors were coated with, mostly bits and blood. It wasn't exactly the personal approach that he preferred, but sometimes just making a mess would get his point across. He ambled through the ship, ensuring none of the bits could speak or move, taking the odd souvenir until he was certain no one would be sending out any inconvenient signals. He burned off the mess currently sticking to his feet and concentrated on the next part of his plan. Silver Wisp had prepared for the service, organizing the witnesses and their requirements. Now he simply stood beside Rowan and readied himself. In front of him sat 3 altars, recovered from the wreckage of the world. Stone, ice and soil. They had been recovered by one of the witnesses, a human that had chosen naked space as its environment and disliked interiors. It felt this was a suitable demonstration of its grief and solidarity. Silver Wisp agreed at Rowan's request. It was taking place in her quarters, and the soft green and gentle breeze seemed to gentle the mood. No one forgot that they were here on a mission of death and vengeance, but it reminded people of their better selves. The man that stood forward to conduct the service was tall, thin, and gray-skinned, wrapped in a dark robe. He stood in front of the altars and paused, waiting for the conversation to dwindle. When he was satisfied with the quiet, he began. Welcome to the family of man. I'm called Seek's Dark Places, and today is a dark day. I too spent my early life on a children's planet, running with spears, hunting and rejoicing in our beginnings. My own children are doing so today too. See such a place so brutalized is a horror to all of us, but we cannot behave like children ourselves. I ask you to reach out to me and let us join in our grief, our distaste for what we know must come, and seek absolution from humanity itself. Silver Wisp closed his eyes and tried to center himself. Psionic wasn't something he ever dabbled in. He felt his own mind and motivations needed enough work without peering into other people's inner selves. Still, he felt a certain relief when the minds around him were joined and he found himself in the company of his peers. Once you stripped away all the alterations, he felt the humanity in the room in a way that mere appearances would never permit. The Mesa Clip was currently impatiently waiting for the Marine ship to arrive. The captain had been provided with the full, lurid and confidential description of what had happened on the Haven of Fire, and the reassuring presence of a few hundred Marines might calm down his crew and himself. If he had to be honest, he flinched at the memory of the celebrations on board after they had aided the humans. A battle with no consequences or risk. It had been a pleasure to use so many restricted systems forbidden by tedious treaties until they had been sent as the wrath of the goddess on the perverted creatures. Now it seemed they had an equally perverted guardian, and it was coming for his ship. He snapped at his comms officer. Where are they? I want to speak to the Marine commander. The comms officer nodded. Yes sir, they're in comms range. Hailing. Now the console started buzzing impatiently as Beacon returned from his walk. He grinned slightly. The mess must be getting worried. He constructed a virtual environment and allowed the call. The comms officer simply saw the scowling face of the Marine commander that was currently smeared across 3 decks like jam. What demanded Beacon? The comms officer stuttered slightly, surprised by the aggression. Sir, the captain wishes to speak to you. Putting you through now. He hurriedly pushed the call to the captain's cabin. With a sigh of relief, the bridge crew glanced at each other and pretended they had heard nothing. The captain was impatiently prowling his office, feeling the hot breath of a predator on his neck in a way that he hadn't in his adult life. It was the same fear that had driven his people to destroy the humans in the first place. He wanted guns, men, reassurance. Finally he was face to face with his protector. Commander, what is Your status beacon was rather enjoying the opportunity and opened his mouth in a sneer. My, what, are you blind? Did you somehow miss my ship approaching, or did you forget your orders to maintain signal silence until I land? He pushed his face closer. I know you herbivores don't like to face some death ghost alone, but letting the whole system know you need a babysitter won't help your career, will it? He pulled back. I'll be on your ship in 2 hours. Shut up, sit down, and wait until I get there to hold your hand. Tell your senior officers and staff to meet my ship. I don't want to repeat myself. Commander, our beacon cut the call. That should do wonders for morale. The captain stood in front of the blank screen and gently deflated his mouth, working soundlessly. The service dispersed gently, everyone preoccupied with their own thoughts. Silver Wisp and Rowan remained with Seek's dark places and let them leave before he spoke. The reality of war is never as simple as the idea of it, Rowan remarked. Silver Wisp nodded. But it is not new to us, and I must make preparations. He turned to the seer. Thank you, that was very helpful. Let me know if anything arises that I need to deal with. He bowed to Rowan and left. They watched him go. Rowan turned to the tall gray seer. So your verdict, I ask, as one of the quorum. This is my war, she reminded him. He grasped her hand. Then I will show you. The imagery was slightly strange, almost like a dream. Half remembered, the seer chimed in. Your mind is interpreting things for you. I am simply sending the raw data. She closed her eyes and took the sense of a rough wind blowing through her branches, dark clouds and storms on the horizon, the smell of burning, the smell of dying trees and dead ground, the silent weeping, and then the rage. She felt herself meld with her community, seeking blood payment for an atrocity. She felt the disciplined wrath of Silver Wisp stand out, driving the battle, and unwilling to see the green places fall again. She saw the spear in his hand, his shield held high. She felt her people wrap themselves tightly around him, becoming a banner on the spear, a license. She opened her eyes and looked at the seer. Thank you, she bowed and turned away. Citadel-class Marine 38 requesting docking. The captain had remained in sullen silence until the ship arrived. He would have words with the commander on his terms on his ship. He hadn't felt so humiliated since he had been a junior officer and crossed a senior NCO. He commanded a battleship. He went beyond the request of the Marine commander and filled the landing dock with his ship guards in full armor as well as his officers. He knew it was childish, but he still sent the orders. He also scanned the incoming craft until the paint on it started to blister. Then he decided to wait on his bridge and meet the insolent Marine from his command chair. Beacon had stepped off the Marine ship as soon as it had passed through the sensors. He chirped out the docking commands even as he made his way behind the assembled crew of the battleship, and then he waited. He really wanted to see this. The ship landed unmolested and unprotecting. The troops waited, wondering why they had been woken up and sent to the armory for this. It was just the Marines. Still they held their ground. The silence drew out as no one opened the hatch. Some uncomfortable twitching and scratching filled the vast room. Nothing and nobody moved. The captain seed. Obviously the Marine commander was waiting for him to appear. He should have spoken up, but the damned creature had made his point about signal silence. He curtly nodded at his bridge staff and stomped off to meet the blasted soldier. The landing dock weren't particularly pretty. Utilitarian ramps and offices clumped into some sort of efficient machine. It did, however, have the military pump that insists on a proper entrance for the captain. His personal guard hurried behind him as he marched to the hatch and waited. Nothing. Beacon grinned. The blood and then the smell, that's what the crew remembered. As the captain had ordered the hatch open, a flood of gore had seeped out of the ship. They saw clumps, then they saw the walls. They saw the captain begin to throw up as he tried to wave them away. Then the smell, a smell that filled the room and entered the vents, sharing it with the rest of the ship. The captain's guard grabbed him and began dragging him away, the second ordering them out and calling for medics. No one moved, held by the horror. Then they remembered that they were military, proud upholders of the empire, and drew their weapons ready for anything, nearly anything, from the